So first, a disclaimer. There will be no beatings after Mass. There will, however, be fellowship with coffee and donuts in the Cathedral Hall and a newcomer's reception, so that's a little more positive approach. But I want to focus on three things in our scriptures today. First is the promise, the second is the journey, and the third is the traveling bag. So first, the promise. You know, in the second reading from Hebrews, there's this beautiful description of the promise that was made to Abraham. And the promise was twofold, that Abraham would have a people, that he'd have a lasting legacy, and that he would have a homeland, a place of his own, a place where he would finally be able to rest in peace. And so those two promises were made to Abraham. And of course, Abraham, as you know, was very advanced in age. His wife was not able to have children, and so he had absolutely no reason to believe the promise. It was a ridiculous promise. And yet, Abraham trusted. Now, we live in a world today that tends to oppose faith and reason. We live in a world that sees faith as something for children, something that's a less intelligent way to approach life, because of course it's not based in science, it's not based on evidence, it's not based on facts. And that is a false interpretation of faith. Now there's also science, and science looks for evidence, science tests hypotheses, science looks for facts, and that's great. The problem is we have bifurcated the human person into either faith or reason. And that's not a fully human person. A fully human person has both faith and reason. And it's important that we have both, because we can know all kinds of facts. I could look at any one of you and I could learn all kinds of facts about you. I could read your profile on social media, which, by the way, I've read some of them. Easy go. But just knowing facts about you does not give me any reason to trust you. It gives me no basis for trust whatsoever, because just knowing where you were born, what kind of job you have, what kind of clothes you like to wear, that doesn't do anything in the way of trust. But spending time with you, getting to know you on a personal level, that would actually build trust. And if I see your actions and behaviors over time, I could actually make that decision to trust you. But it is a decision. And it's the difference between head knowledge and heart knowledge. And that's why Abraham was able to trust God. He was able to place his faith in God because his experience with God over time had shown to him that God indeed was trustworthy. And Abraham made a decision of the head and the heart that God's actions always fulfilled his promises, that God's promises were kept, even though we might not always see it come to fruition in our lifetime. And that's the other part the letter from the Hebrews makes, is he points out the fact that Abraham believed in the promises made to him, even though he didn't fully see them. He briefly lived in the promised land, and he saw his son Isaac born, but he didn't see the great nation. He didn't see how this amazing people was given to him. He had to believe what God promised, and he had to greet it from afar. He had to wave at it because he wasn't going to see it in his lifetime. And yet we know the story of Abraham because God indeed was faithful. Abraham's heritage continued to grow and expand, and eventually God brought them into the promised land and gave them a land filled with milk and honey. And of course, that's a prefiguring, that's an image of what God desires for all of us, not just one people, but all people. And that's why in the gospel, Jesus says, "Do not be anxious and afraid, little children. God desires to give you the kingdom." And so on the days when we're feeling a little doubtful, on the days when we're not quite so sure, we need to go back to that opening line of the gospel. God's desire for us is the kingdom. God's not a game player. He's not a jokester or a trickster. He's not trying to trick us out of heaven. His desire for us is to give us a land and a people. But it's a land and a people that lasts forever. It's a heavenly homeland. It's the people of God. And so our journey through life really is about journeying towards that homeland. And there's some dangers with that, because sometimes when people are journeying towards their heavenly homeland, they start to act as if this world has no meaning, has no significance. Because I'm going to heaven, I can throw all this away. It doesn't matter. I'm just on my way to heaven, and as soon as I can get there, I'll be glad to be rid of this earth. And that's such a shame, because God created this earth good. He created us good. And there's so many goods in this world that he wants us to experience. And there are also other things that are meant for us. There are ways that we are to engage with the world. And it's our engagement with the world that shows that we are people headed to our homeland. The way we act in the world does matter. The way we treat our neighbor does matter. The way we are involved in our community to build a better community does matter. And that's what leads us to the traveling bag. If you know about my past, I used to backpack a lot. I used to try and section hike the Appalachian Trail, and to get ready for it, I started to do some test hikes, some little short 3-day backpacking trips. And I'm a learner by experience, usually painful experience. And so on my first backpacking trip, I packed my bag up and thought I was pretty efficient in everything I brought with me. I brought a glass French press coffee maker, a pound of coffee for a 3-day trip, a bag of carrots, and a couple of apples. Now, if you know anything about those things, they're very, very heavy. And my pack weighed in at about 60 pounds, and we decided to hike Mount Sterling, which is straight up to this little observation post. And so we did it, and we made it, barely, but every foot got heavier and heavier. And so eventually I realized that I could pare down. I could probably do with a few less things in that bag. And I eventually got to about 18 pounds in my bag, and that made life much more enjoyable. But you know, one of the things about life for all of us is things accumulate. You know, there's so many things we think we need, and so our traveling sack tends to get a little heavy. We start to acquire all these things, and of course, most of our acquisition is based upon trying to feel safe, trying to feel protected. And that's why Jesus goes right at the heart of the matter. He says, you know, there's nothing you can possess or acquire that will truly make you safe. There's nothing you can hold on to that is going to protect you for life eternal. The only thing to put into your traveling bag are the things that we do for others, the things that we do out of charity, out of love, the things that we do out of service. Those are the things that actually help us and others on the journey to reach our heavenly homeland. And so when Jesus says, make for yourselves purses or bags that last forever, what he's talking about is not winning bonus points, but really gathering those things in life that help us on the journey. Gathering together those experiences, those times when we go out of ourselves to help another, when we go out of ourselves to serve as Christ serves us. Those are the things that make the journey very evident of where we're headed. It makes it very clear to ourselves and the world that our journey is not limited to here, it's a journey to our heavenly homeland. The other thing on that journey is that there are times when we get tired. There's times when we become doubtful of the destination. There's times when we can question whether or not the promise God made is real, whether or not God is going to fulfill his promise to us. And that's why God gives us a people, the people of God. That's why we journey together. That's why we gather in this place on Sunday to worship. Because when we gather together, we are built up by the faith of each other. When we gather together, we are fed on the scriptures, on the very word of God. When we gather together, God gives us food for the journey. We call that the Eucharist. The food for the journey enables us to continue moving forward towards our heavenly homeland, because in faith, in trust, we know that there is a destination for each of us, a destination that God has prepared for us, a place that we can truly call home.